All right, well, welcome all. We're so honored and grateful that you've chosen to join us today for what we hope will be an important conversation, not just for today, but for the future that we're building together. My name is Nicole Roselle, and I serve as the co-founder and co-president of New Visions. To begin our time together today, I offer an invitation to us all to pause and consider the question, what time is it on the clock of the world? Are we at midnight? Systems collapsing, democracy failing, the weight of crises bearing down? Are we in the deep hours before dawn? That liminal space where old structures are breaking apart, but new ones haven't fully emerged? Or are we at sunset, witnessing the beginning of something we can't fully yet see? I suspect many of you are here today because you feel we're living in a threshold moment. I ask you to consider, what if this moment of breakdown is also a moment of breakthrough? What if the systems falling around us are creating space for something unprecedented to emerge? Imagine the world that wants to be born through this threshold. How does it feel to live in it? To participate in decisions that affect your life? To know your community has what it needs? To disagree with someone and still trust that you both want justice? That vision, that sense of what's possible, isn't wishful thinking. It's the future calling us forward. And responding to that call, as we'll explore today, is both an art and a practice. At New Visions, we exist because we believe that the biggest barrier to transformative change isn't a lack of good ideas. It's our inability to think beyond the immediate crisis in front of us and act with integrity and in community. Our approach is built on the simple but radical premise that lasting democratic change requires us to disrupt the short-term thinking that keeps us trapped in cycles of reaction. We work with leaders in social movements and democratic institutions to develop what we call transformative vision, the ability to see beyond current constraints and build toward futures that center justice, equity, and care. This means doing the deep work of imagination alongside the practical work of organizing. It means creating spaces where activists and institutional leaders can step back from the day-to-day urgency and ask fundamental questions. What would our movements look like if they were designed for the world we want, not just the world we're fighting against? How did we build the democratic practices that don't reproduce the power dynamics we're trying to change? To commemorate this International Democracy Day, we're gathering to reflect with honesty and vulnerability on democracy as a living practice, not as something we inherit, but as something we create again and again in each moment we choose to show up for each other. The extraordinary leaders you'll hear from today have something profound in common. They've all had to confront the gap between democracy they were promised and the democracy they've actually lived. They've all experienced what it means when systems fail the people they claim to serve. And most importantly, they've all found ways to transform the experience of failure into fuel for building something better. Zakia Khattabi has navigated the complexities of environmental justice within political institutions while staying rooted in movement work. Baia Pataraia has worked at the intersection of civil society and governance in a context where democracy itself was being redefined. Daniela Chacón Arias has bridged feminist organizing with formal political power. And Samson Itodo, who we hope will be able to join us, has spent years organizing democratic processes while never losing sight of who those processes must truly serve. We're asking these leaders to take part in a powerful practice, to be vulnerable about what hasn't worked. In a political culture that rewards us for projecting certainty, they're going to share their uncertainties. In a moment when we're often asked to choose between hope and realism, they're going to show us what it looks like to be both. Because that's what this moment requires, the ability to adapt and transform even as the ground shifts beneath our feet. So, as we begin this conversation, I invite you to listen not just with your minds, but with your imagination. Listen for the world these speakers are building, not just the world they're critiquing. Listen for the places where their experiences might connect with your own context, your own community, your own sense of what's possible. And you're not just here to observe. You're here because you're part of this transformation. The pathways forward aren't something that we will be handed to us. They're something that we're creating together in real time through conversations like this one. So let's get started. I'd like to start off by acknowledging it was Zakia who serves on the New Visions Advisory Board, who inspired this conversation. Shortly following the close of 2024, a year where voters in more than 60 countries participated in elections, which largely proved difficult for incumbents and has resulted in all sorts of disruption, Zakia called for a reckoning of progressive parties such as her own. So, Zakia, I'd like to invite you to start our conversation by sharing a bit about the context around elections in Belgium last year, what lessons you as the party leader have taken from that experience, about what needs to be built differently.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicole. And thank you for allowing me to share with you all those reflections, because from the moment of the election 1 year ago till now, I still didn't find any place where we can credibly rebuild something. So thank you for that. The Belgium elections last year reflect a European dynamic, a shift toward conservatism, the far right, the extreme right. And it's easy, and that was maybe about that you were talking about, but my opinion is that it's easy for us to focus on their rhetoric, on their ability to exploit fears. But the harder truth is this: it is the victory of the right, of the populism, it is our defeat. It is our defeat. And progressives have failed to, and I say it, I've been minister, but before that, I was president of a Green Party. So saying that, I also take my own responsibility. So that's why I speak so frankly, if I may say it like that. And so progressives have failed to embody hope, to mobilize, to inspire trust. And that is the uncomfortable reality we must confront if we want to rebuild something strong and something credible. Over time, the left has allowed itself to be trapped in a managerial narrative, a narrative where politics is reduced to figures, efficiency, and crisis management. But this framing is not neutral. It aligns with the right's conception of politics as administration of the existing order rather than transformation of society. In such a vision, citizens are no longer participants in a collective project, they are clients of a system. And the transformative ambition of the left dissolves, and with it, the belief that politics can change lives. And even if you will hear me, and you will hear my criticism also as minister, it's also because I know it is possible. I'm convinced that something else is possible. And as minister, I have seen how strong the gravitational pull of this managerial logic is, especially within coalition governments. In Belgium, we have coalition governments, and I was in a government with the right and the traditional left, as we call it. So it was the liberal, the green, the Christian Democrat, and the socialist. And in this context, when progressives accept to play by those rules, we do more than abandon our ideals. We feed a deeper democratic crisis. And people look at institutions and sees only bureaucracy, compromises, and limitations. They stop believing politics can deliver. And into that void step populist and extremist forces who reintroduce passion and narrative, albeit through anger, exclusion, and fear. And if we are serious about rebuilding, then the task is colossal. It is not about better communication, and I see it also in my own party. So we lose the last elections, and now we are trying to rebuild new. We are working on our communication, but it's not enough. It's not at this stage. It is no more only a question of communication or sharper management. It's about re-establishing politics as a space of meaning and imagination. So it sounds strange here when I say we need to put politics in our politic debates. It sounds strange, but it is because I think that people say about me that I'm a dogmatic woman. But I say, okay, I have no problem with that. If it is not in politics, where can we be dogmatic? For me, it's not a dogmatic. There is no negative connotation on that. For me, dogmatism is, okay, having a clear project, a clear vision of society, and assume it. More than only being in the gestion, in the gestion. And so, yeah, I will stop there because I've taken a lot of time and I have still so much things to share with you. But it's only by reclaiming that space. So only by reclaiming that space can we hope to close the breach that has been opened for the far right, not by the far right, but for the far right, by us as progressive, and to restore trust in the democratic promise. At this stage, Nicole, I think that I took enough time to share with you what is really what made me wake up those last weeks and months.
Zakia, thank you for offering the frank and honest critique of not only your own work and that of the party, but of the broader system. I think you offered some important foundations for the conversation. Baia, you've been central to driving a feminist agenda as part of Georgia's pro-democracy movement. You also currently lead one of several Georgian civil society organizations being targeted by the regime in the latest round of authoritarian attempts to quell opposition. I'd like to invite you to share what you can about how you think traditional democratic institutions in Georgia have failed, and what this failure reveals about power structures.
Thank you, everyone. And I think that whatever is happening in Georgia, it's not exclusive. And unfortunately, in the crisis of democracy, which is a very severe problem nowadays, there is a lot of questions to democracy, and people supporters of current authorities in Georgia that we call regime. Their supporters say that Socrates rule is also fine, and that they are efficient, they are successful from economic perspective, and that actually women can be can also the state can be run by authoritarian countries and be still doing fine. So and this is already like a major narrative which is discussed, and there is a lot of European Union skepticism, and propaganda is extremely important in this battle. And for women, we do very much understand that being democratic is not just our choice, just not our will, but it's absolute necessity for us to thrive and just to survive. Because we have seen these authoritarian countries and what is happening to women there, and that they are abolishing all kinds of laws, even related to domestic violence. Already mandatory gender quotas have been abolished in Georgia. They removed the word gender and gender identity from all the legislation which was in place. And the ridiculous thing is that they're saying that now it's in fashion and it's modern to do it, to remove gender from legislation. And they frequently cite US and Trump administration for that as well. And they are just saying that this is the newest things that you could do. And but we women in Georgia do understand that for us it's we do not even have a choice. Democracy is the only option where women can have their rights, where women can have their power to participate in political life, in social, economic life, where we can still fight for equality. But the geopolitics in the world now is very confusing for many. US role, China's role, how China using its soft power now tries to dominate developing countries, young democracies, Russia and Ukrainian war, and what the rest of the world does with this war. Because we believe that we are in hybrid war with Russia right now. And whatever is happening in Georgia, it's not only our business, it's not only our matters which is happening, but there is a huge influence from Russia. Both when it comes to the elections and its outcomes and how elections are fraud, and also how the narratives and the agenda is political agenda is created in the country. Unfortunately, using Russian textbooks, propaganda is extremely strong in our country. And this propaganda also is very anti-gender and very anti-equality, very anti-human rights, I would say, and anti-democratic. Georgia's case is a very good example how you can range a war without using hard power, without using tanks or arms or bullets, but still have a war. And I think that in these kind of situations, so far democracy is not as strong, and democratic world is not as strong as we would like them to be. According to all the polling stations, I mean, all the polls that we have, big majority, more than 80% of Georgian population wishes to become a member of EU. And despite this, we have this kind of situation where for 280 days, there is like non-stop protest in the street on major Rustaveli Avenue in Tbilisi. Major oppositional leaders are in jail. And now they're after civil society organization leaders and civil leaders. And like for 12 organizations, now all the assets are frozen, including my organization, which was created in 2001 to combat domestic violence. Our assets are frozen, and I was summoned in court yesterday to give like answers to the prosecutor's office on so-called sabotage case. And of course, they have nothing. And it's very clear for everyone that they just try to collapse everything which has like critical voice, independent voice, like democratic institutions and strong civil society is a very important part of democracy in every world, and now and independent media as well. And there is constant attacks on independent media as well. They also cut down all kinds of financing sources for independent media as well. And it's important what the rest of the world does when this kind of crackdown is going on in the country where people support democracy. And I think that it's very important that like democratic world and civilization takes a strong step and strong word. So far, there have been quite a number of sanctions against the regime in Georgia. There is Megobari Act under discussion in US, and EU still not can find a consensus to put sanctions on Georgia, despite the fact that they do understand what is going on. And this is probably the problem of EU itself as well, that they cannot really come into consensus to support Georgian people in Georgia in our fight for democracy. And whatever is happening, Georgia is not exclusive. Similar problems are in many other countries, like in Serbia, similar things are going on. In Hungary, similar things are going on. In Turkey, similar problems we see, etc. So this is a very big crisis of democracy and fight between authoritarianism and democracy in the world. And I think that democratic world should be doing better, and they can do better. So for all of us, I think that it's important to discuss about it, to realize whatever is happening, and to push our governments to take more serious steps.
Baia, you spoke so eloquently about, first of all, the anti-gender movement, not as a byproduct, but as a specific strategy to undermine democratic values and fortify authoritarianism. And your last point there around how they are learning from one another, and we need to engage and learn and build deep alliances and solidarity, starting from a point of frank reflection, which we're hoping to do today. So thank you for that. Daniela, we'll now turn to you. You served as vice mayor and city councilor in Quito, and now lead an organization you co-founded to build collective action for more inclusive cities. Could you describe a time when you had to choose between working within those existing institutions or working outside them, and in opposition to them, perhaps, and what you learned through that choice?
Thank you, Nicole, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share this space with Zakia and Baia. So, I come from a background where government institutions at the local level are not understanding and are not responding to my life experience as a woman in a city, with policies and projects that do not understand what does it mean to be a woman, with safety and security issues that are different from men, from having the burden of unpaid domestic care work that has consequences in terms of unemployment, informality, poverty, and gender-based violence, and all of those issues not being addressed properly by the city or the national government. And coming also from a context where I was able to be elected because of the quota system. If there would have been a quota system in Ecuador, I am pretty sure that I would not be chosen to be on that list to be elected. So there was this promise, there was this democratic promise that we will include women, and that will allow for democracy to flourish and for our issues to be recognized as important issues in the political agenda, both at the party level and at the policy level. But it's been very unfortunate that the efforts of women and men, of course, but mostly women that have been pushing for this agenda are getting diminished. And so we see little successes here and there, but we're not seeing policy change. We're not seeing a situation that is changing. We've not seen that the lives of women have actually gotten significantly better because of this democratic promise. And one of the issues that are very important for this situation, for not being able to progress as much as it should, Ecuador has a very strong quota system, which means that almost the majority of Congress are represented by women. But that does not happen at the executive level. So, presidency, ministers, mayors, and all of those authorities that are elected for an executive position have always been male. And just recently, a couple of years ago, the women's movement promoted an amendment to the law so that the quota system would not only work in a vertical way, but also in a horizontal way, in a way that it will include a mandate for including women in the executive level candidacies, but that's just getting started. And the main issue that is forcing women out of the system is political violence, gender-based political violence. And so as women enter the political arena and as we enter more and more, the system tries to protect itself. The patriarchal system sort of like tries to survive from the way it has always been without the significant presence of women at the decision level. And so it uses the political violence as a way to protecting itself and pushing away the changes and pushing away the reform. So it is very disheartening that within the system, we are not finding the way to actually fulfill that democratic promise that women will be represented. And not only by seeing other women in power, but by seeing the policies and the programs change to address the most pressing needs that we face as women. We continue to be with the highest unemployment rate, the highest informality rate, the highest poverty rate. Those things have not changed significantly in the past few years. And I talk from personal experience that I've decided to work outside the system, trying to answer to Nicole's question, because the time that I was an elected officer, I faced a lot of political violence, and it was just very difficult to go through that. It's just a way where you're discouraged every single day, on every single moment, that you should not be there, that it's going to be much more difficult for you to stay in office and to stay in power, and how much are you going to have to resign from your values, from your beliefs, from your agenda, if you stay and face continued political violence. And we've seen that although Ecuador had this growth in terms of political participation of women, we sort of like reach, a top where we are starting to see that women are participating because of the quota law, but that after their first term, they don't want to go back. And I talk, from the personal experience, because that happened to me. I had my term and I was done with it because it was just and I know this is a contradiction, because now I'm working from civil society to help women stay in politics, be present in political parties, push for feminist agendas, and push for the shift of power, which is basically what we're working for. But working from the outside, understanding that maybe in the outside there's a little bit more power to change the things that we cannot change within the system. And it might seem like a contradiction, but what we have seen, since starting working for this and from the personal experience, I am seeing that women are much more prepared to navigate and understand the system that we're facing. Because I think that's one of the main things. We enter politics with such effervescence and sometimes ingenuity of what it can mean for us. And once we're there, we realize how difficult it is. And so we need to be prepared, not only academically or professionally, but basically emotionally prepared. And so we've been focusing a lot on that. How do we really understand the structures of power, and what are we going to face from other women as well, not only from men? and how to protect yourself in a way that will allow you to stay in politics and that will allow you to make those changes. So, of course, I have not lost hope. And I always say that it might be a future where I consider going back to politics, because I think that people, that we are politicians forever. Once a politician, always a politician. But there's time and time for things. And I think that there is a need for this strong civil society to help women navigate the entrance and staying in politics. Staying is the most important word, especially, and I'll finish with this, especially now where, we have different situation than in Europe, but we also are facing democratic, backlashes, much more subtle than in Europe and in the work context, but also with governments, both from the left and the right. There's no difference, to be honest. There are passing laws and there are passing resolutions to reduce the capacity of civil society organizations to work at the democracy and citizen participation level. And so there is much more need now than ever to strengthen the work that we do from civil society, so that we can continue to push for an agenda, but also create an environment that will support women politicians and an agenda, a feminist agenda that will actually change the situation that we have lived for thousands of years. Thank you.
Daniela, you offered some really compelling thoughts on, how can we move beyond compromising on our values in wanting to participate in public service, which politics ultimately is and could be. Before we sort of entertain that really provocative question, though, I want to acknowledge that our fourth speaker in this journey, Samson, has joined us. Welcome, Samson. We're thrilled to have you.
No, thanks so much, Nicole.
And I had mentioned to the speakers, but for others who are with us, just acknowledge that you're, like so many of us, on the move these days. And so we're in transit in Zambia at the moment. So we're really grateful that you're able to join. We started off the conversation, asking everyone to offer some vulnerable reflections on their personal and political journeys, where they see themselves now, and offering some insights into the context which they find themselves in. And a lot of interesting points came up. I think, from your perspective, having built movements, advised democratic institutions, and having been a staunch advocate for young people's voice and democracy in Nigeria and well beyond, if we could start with a question for you, what myth about democracy have you had to let go of? And what was that process like for you personally?
What myth about democracy? This might sound very controversial, but let me start by saying thanks, Nicole, for the invitation. And I do apologize that I joined late. As with this high-level events, the opening plenary didn't start early, and then we ran in beyond time. So I do apologize. I'm joining late. But I listened to the last speaker. I'm quite inspired with her story, and it's the point she made that once a politician, always a politician. I would say once an activist, always an activist, because activism is a way of life. Speaking about one myth, quite provocative. I think one myth about democracy that I've had to let go, it's that in democracy, it's the people that count. And that the people's preferences is what informs public policy and decision making. And for anyone who has worked in the governance space and also worked with parliamentarians, you clearly see that's really a myth. Sometimes it's really the individual preferences of politicians that takes the day. The only thing to do there is, how do you ensure there's an alignment between the personal interest of political elites and political actors and the collective interest? And this is the big challenge of the sort of mobilization of social interest in society. And this is where organizers have a critical role to play. So if there's one myth, I know this might sound very controversial, but the reality is anyone who has worked with people in power, those who are in power, clearly know that the reality is that it's the individual preferences of political elites and not necessarily the ideal, which is the overall and public interest or collective interest of people. Does that answer your question?
It does. And it offers a powerful invitation to really, as you said, and as others have mentioned, we really are speaking about and to power. And so I want to ask one question and open it up to any of the speakers who'd like to start the conversation. But before I offer that question, just a note to any of our guests who would also like to raise questions for our speakers, please go ahead and drop them into the chat or raise your hand so that we can make sure to acknowledge you and give you space to contribute to the conversation as well. But to come back to where Samson left off, I want to invite beginning to move in the direction of what possible futures could look like. You all in various ways have offered critiques about the current systems, governing structures you exist within, organizations you've led or participated in, and also shared some frank reflections on your own accomplishments and personal failings in this journey. But now I'd like to ask us all to try and shift our mindset and open the aperture to focus on what democracy would actually look like if care and justice were centered rather than just process and procedure.
Maybe
I'll open up to any of our speakers to start. Samson, go ahead, start us off.
Let me start. First, when you think about the future of democracy and where I see things go, I think one, we need to decondense and decentralize power. I think that this system and structure where power is vested in institutions and they're exercising that power, we've seen how limits on power are not really effective. And so how do we ensure safeguards that people power, is institutionalized and is respected? And there are several climes that don't have safeguards in place. So they need to ensure those safeguards are in place. And I give a classic example. When you think about democratic innovation, things like people's assemblies, things like deliberative democracy tools that helps and infuses public deliberation into decision making. And where you have parliaments, you can also have people's parliaments. And once they make a decision, that they are not in any way reviewed or subject to the approval of any other political institution. That's one. The second is the future of democracy. This might sound a bit controversial, but the future of democracy is online. And I say this because of the demographic shifts. Just see what's happening in Nepal in the last 24 hours. That should tell us that these young Gen Zs are rethinking democracy differently. And we shouldn't get them to a point where they begin to destroy national assets. Because at the end of the day, we suffer when violence becomes the only option accorded to people. So the use of digital activism will shape and define democracy moving forward. And just the last point I just make about the future, of democracy is we need to start rethinking the whole concept of political parties. And I've made this argument several times. Political parties over time, I think they've gone obsolete. I think that they are not delivering on their sort of foundational mandate of aggregation of social interest. They've become nothing but special purpose vehicle just to seek power and not address the needs of people. Maybe we need to start getting social movements, as the answer. I don't say that they are guarantees that they will provide the accountable, transparent leadership that we need in the public space. But if social movements are stepping in as buffers of pushing the boundaries, if protest movements are doing that, then we need to think about converting the civic power to the political power, which at the end of the day, if it doesn't advance the common good of people, if it doesn't put food on the table of people, if it doesn't provide security for people, and then if it doesn't make the people free, then it would have lost, its utility. So those are sort of my three submissions. Nicole, over.
Passionate as always, and really on point in terms of driving some creative thinking. Zakia, I see your hand. I know you have thoughts and maybe some responses to some of Samson's views.
Not sure. I have more questions. As I told you when you asked me to join the conversation, but hearing us, well, green parties are champions of deliberative assembly, of citizen participation. So I have no doubt about the necessity of such deliberation. But as hearing us, we speak of democracy as a dialogue, as a loop where citizens actively shape decisions. But yet today, when we see the results of elections around the world, many seem to seek authority figures rather than engagement. And so what are we now talking about? And this tension is not, it's not trivial, if I may say it like that. It really challenges the very heart of participatory governance. And the tensions we face today is revealing. Citizens have been taught, well, I come back to what I told, the failure of the progressives, sorry for that, but it's something in my own garden, so I really feel free to say it like that, and so frankly. Citizens were told, we listen to you. And yet, too often, nothing followed. And this is the failure of progressives. We promised participation, but delivered disappointment. And so it takes me back to my first point, but we all all speak from our own perspective. And so my obsession in the debate about the future of democracy is precisely how to rebuild a left political project that is credible, one that proves democracy is not a hollow world, but a lived reality, having in mind years of failure. And so how can we rebuild the trust to give people the will to actively participate? And so sorry, this is not a question, but I think that here we are only, it's a beginning, Nicole. We are paving the way to something. And so I give some elements to pave this way.
No, I appreciate that. And the issue of trust, which you raised earlier, and I think really speaks to the heart of Samson's recommendations, is going to be fundamental. How to acknowledge the trust not only that's been lost, but how through hard work to begin rebuilding trust in not just processes, but also leaders who actually are committed to sharing power in new ways. I see Daniela's hand, and then Baia, I think you also would like to come in. So Daniela, to you, and then Baia.
Well, on the same note, during a progressive government in Ecuador in the past decade, there was the changing our constitution and the approval of a very strong citizen participation legal framework. And one of the things that we do at Tandem, which is a nonprofit that I run, has been, working with citizens to have them understand the participatory framework so that they can actually use it to actively participate and affect change with decision makers. But as you've all said, unfortunately, that legal framework has, in many cases, I would say in the majority of the cases, has been just a framework. In the end, the decisions are not being made with the people. In the end, when somebody wants to use the right to participate, is immediately seen as an opponent, as an adversary, or as a threat to political power, when it doesn't necessarily is that way. It's just a matter of people wanting to be part of the decisions and wanting to put in the conversation things that are not in the conversation. So I do think there's a huge debt from the progressive movements, with like true participation. And I think one of the other debts, especially in Latin America, has been corruption. So what is happening is that youth are very disempowered because they see that the government and the promises of the government are not reaching them and will not reach them, because everything is going to fulfill the interests of the ones in power, and it just continues to feed itself. So I do think there's a need for disruption, an honest and truth disruption. And I do think that there is a need, as Zakia is saying, of a new proposal from the left, from the progressive, to really incorporate democratic practices, and for the ones making the decision to understand that you are going to have to change your mind, and that you probably become more powerful if you do so.
Daniela, I love that idea of the permission to accept failure as an opportunity for liberation from those who seek to define new futures. Baia, over to you.
As I was already mentioning, democratic ruling is not the everybody's preferred ruling. Authoritarian ruling is becoming more and more popular because a lot of people, ordinary people, also think that if democracy cannot deliver, maybe autocracy can deliver. Really, a lot of people already ask this question. So they don't want to fight for democracy anymore because authoritarian is doing its own job on its own. So they don't need people to defend autocracy. But democracy needs people to be defended. And now there's the one big question is democracy better than autocracy? And I think that, first of all, the democratic countries and democratic governments should respond to it and persuade that democracy is better by showing a huge support to democracies around them, in the neighborhood, in the bigger neighborhood, etc., to show that they value it. It should be like value-based thing. This is the one thing. And the second thing, which has been more debated here now, is when already there is a democracy and why it has a crisis, why it cannot deliver anything. I think the major problem is that whom democracy serves. Is it people? It's not people. Mostly it's either money or power. Those who came in democratically in power, they want to maintain this power, and very frequently they want it because of the money. And in the end, everything goes down to money. And then it seems like money is ruling democratic countries, actually, and not democracy itself. So, and here, I also, for myself, have a lot of questions. And for like right now in Georgia, in our regime, everyone is multimillionaire, really. And they became rich via being into the power, via being corrupt in tenders, etc., etc. And at the top of it, there is a Russian oligarch who actually built this system, which is like Russian style system. And now they say that we don't need democracy anymore because we are all rich now and we just need to maintain our power, and that's easier for us. So for those countries who are still democratic, they have to deliver to people and not to the rich. And this should be very, very open, very honest, and very clear thing. Whom do we serve? Do we serve the big corporations and big money, or do we serve the people? And if we don't prove that we serve to people, people will not protect us, and democracy will be gone. The countries will not be gone. Everyone and everyone will survive, but democracy will be lost, and authoritarian leadership will take over the world.
So, Baia, I have to pose the question back to you. Agreed with everything you just outlined in terms of where power and where real interests are lying at the moment. How do we begin to chip away at that? What are sort of tangible steps? And let me ask you to give your own example. How are you looking at this in the environment that you're facing today as a leader in Georgia, with all of these systemic barriers to the sort of change that you're calling for? What are some very tangible steps that you're considering in your daily life that you could offer as we get ready to close out our conversation here, for those who are also trying to connect that deep radical transformation that we're in alignment for needing and calling for, and trying to create that tension with how do I enact it in my daily life, and where do I find power on the daily basis?
Democracy is a high maintenance thing. And democracy actually needs like two powers. One within the country, like people should be defending democracy, and other democracies should be defending those democracies who are in struggle. And this is what we're requesting in Georgia, saying that we, the people of Georgia, stand in the street. We don't stop, not even for one day, fighting for our democratic future, but we also request other democracies to help us. That's why we ask for Mega Act from US. That's why I ask for sanctions from EU. That's why we ask that everyone should support Ukraine if they want to win. If democracy wants to survive in the world, democratic countries should understand that they are not responsible only to their own people. They are, for first place, they are responsible to their own people, but also they have a responsibility towards other democratic nations and peoples who are struggling to achieve democracy. And like, I think that like people are doing better now in every country, but other democracies are not efficient and good enough to support each other and to think how to use whatever they have. Come on. US and Europe is the richest places in the planet. They have everything. They have literally everything to defend themselves and the idea of democracy. And they should do it.
Powerful words, Baia. Zakia, Samson, Daniela, if you'd like to offer any closing thoughts on that question of how you're connecting your personal action and daily life to these broader transformations that we're all seeking to bring about, I invite you to offer thoughts in closing.
Please permit me to offer very brief remarks because I'm going back to a session now. And thanks, Nicole. I'm taking a few things from this discussion, but really thank you very much. And just 2 quick points. It's that the struggle to reclaim democracy is a struggle of our life. It's at the heart of our existence, and we have to see it that way. Because even though it's not the best form of government, but it's still a value that we cherish. So let's continue to do and also try to reclaim democracy. And just tied to that, it is what the struggle. It is what the struggle. Whatever form of democracy, as long as it's about the values, it is what the struggle. And that for those of us who are on this call, people will depend on us for direction. As we direct them, let us also empower them to exercise agency over their destiny and not have them abdicate their responsibility to us, because we're also humans and sometimes we fail. And sometimes we want to advance our own agenda at the expense of the collective agenda. So those for me are some of the sort of closing reflections. I am so sorry that I have to join the next session, but thank you very much, Nicole, and we should talk some more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samson. Daniela, would you like to offer some remarks? And Zakia, to close us?
Yeah, I think Baia and Samson said like really good closing remarks. I would just agree with the need of defending democracy, and that we might think it's much more difficult than authoritarian regimes, of course, because, you know, compromise and understanding that responsibility that we have to others, but it is the best way to respond to people's needs and to respect our rights and our freedoms. So I think we should, you know, in spite of the difficulties, this is a worthwhile battle.
Thank you, Daniela. Zakia?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe as last words, I would like to support what Baia says when she says we have work to do inside, but we need outside support. And first of all, express my solidarity because Baia, we also need you because what is happening to you is what awaits us all. And being with you today is also in our own interest, if I may say it like that. So it's in solidarity, but also because what is happening to you is what awaits us all.
And Zakia, on that note, I want to thank everyone for your humility and the vulnerability that you brought to this question. As Zakia noted, the first step for change is sort of acknowledging its need and being willing to be honest about the role and responsibility we all as individuals, as organizations, as collectives have played to date, and how we want to try and shape new, better futures with the wisdom of the ancestors and the creativity to be unburdened by some of that past as well, as we go forward to shape better futures together. So with that, I want to again just express deep appreciation and gratitude to the speakers and everyone who's been able to join for the conversation today. I think this has met the moment in terms of the spirit of International Democracy Day, not just deliberation, but also sort of commitment to hope and principled action together. So with that, I say thank you, and until the next time.